March 1943. The dense Mexican jungle of Tabasco State. Archaeologist Matthew Sterling's trowel strikes something that shouldn't be there, a child's skull positioned inside the carved stone jaws of a jaguar effigy. But it's what he finds next that makes his blood run cold. Ritual cuts on the bones, precisely placed. Then another child. And metamorphosis, conducted by men who had convinced themselves, and their society, that they could wear divinity like a cloak. And the cost of that divinity was measured in small bones and ritual blades. The first hints that something was wrong in Venta came not from the grand plazas but from the cenotes, the natural sinkholes that dotted the landscape. In 1955, archaeologist Philip Drucker excavated what he called Massive Offering 4, a carefully arranged cache of serpentine blocks and jade figurines buried beneath the ceremonial plaza. Standard Olmec practice. But tucked between the jade offerings were fragments of juvenile finger bones, each showing identical cut marks at the first joint. Drucker noted them in his field journal but didn't pursue the implications. Finger bones could have come from anywhere, he reasoned. Ancient burial grounds got mixed up. The jungle reclaimed everything eventually. The cuts could have been post-mortem damage. He cataloged the fragments and moved on. 3 years later, a local farmer digging a well 2 miles from the main archaeological zone unearthed what he described as a pot of baby teeth. 47 primary teeth to be exact, all from children between the ages of 6 and 8. All extracted with enough force to crack the roots. The pot itself was ceremonial-grade ceramic, decorated with Were-Jaguar motifs, human faces mid-transformation, mouths stretched impossibly wide, teeth becoming fangs. The farmer brought the pot to the nearest Catholic church, where Father Miguel Ramirez contacted the National Institute of Anthropology. Their response was bureaucratically typical, probable ossuary, common practice, nothing unusual about ancient peoples grouping remains. The pot was catalogued and stored. No follow-up investigation was conducted. But Father Ramirez kept his own notes. In a letter to the Bishop of Villahermosa dated June 1958, he wrote, "The teeth trouble me, not their presence but their condition. I have seen many burial artifacts in my years serving this region. These teeth were not gently removed after death. They were torn from living mouths. I can provide no other explanation for the trauma patterns in the bone." The children screamed. The third incident triggered immediate action. In 1960, a team from the University of California, Berkeley excavated Complex E at Venta, a ritual compound separated from the main pyramid by 700 meters. They found a cache they designated Offering 1943E, a rectangular stone cell, no larger than a modern refrigerator, carved from a single block of basalt. Inside lay the articulated skeletons of 6 children, ages estimated between 7 and 10 years. But it was the positioning that made veteran archaeologist James Porter physically ill. Each child's skeleton wore a jaguar pelt, confirmed by residual collagen analysis. The pelts had been tailored to fit the small bodies, and each child's skull showed evidence of trepanation, holes drilled into the cranium while the victim was still alive. The drilling was precise, surgical, targeted at specific points that modern neurology recognizes as sensory processing centers. Porter's field notes, now archived at Berkeley's Bancroft Library, record his growing horror. Day 23, the pelts were sewn onto the children's bodies with sinew thread, entry and exit points visible on the bones. This was not post-mortem decoration. Day 24, the skull perforations follow a pattern. Same locations on all 6 specimens. Someone knew exactly where to drill. Day 25, I found tool marks inside the stone cell. Scraping. Claw marks, almost, but made with human fingernails. The children were alive inside when the stone was sealed. The Berkeley team published their findings in 1962 in American Antiquity, but the language was sanitized, clinical, ritual interment of juveniles with feline associations. The trepanation was described as cranial modification for ceremonial purposes, the claw ma. Archaeas weren't mentioned at all. The paper concluded that Offering 1943E represented high-status sacrificial practices consistent with Olmec religious beliefs about transformation and renewal. Academia moved on, but Porter didn't. He spent his remaining years before his death in 1979 trying to convince colleagues that Venta hid something systematic, something that went beyond standard archaeological interpretation of ancient religion. His personal correspondence reveals an obsession. They weren't offerings, they were experiments. The priests were trying to do something to these children, and I think they believed it was working. The fourth incident brought everything into horrific focus. In March 1967, Hurricane Beulah devastated the Mexican Gulf Coast. The storm's surge and flooding exposed previously buried structures at Venta, including what's now known as Structure 12, a subterranean chamber complex that had remained hidden for 3,000 years. When Mexican archaeologists entered the chambers in 1968, they found walls covered in plaster murals depicting the transformation process in explicit detail. A priest, identified by his regalia, approaches a child. In the next panel, the priest wears a jaguar pelt. In the third panel, the child is bound to a stone altar. The fourth panel showed the trepanation procedure. The fifth panel, the one that caused heated debate about whether it should be photographed at all, showed the priest wearing the child's skin layered beneath the jaguar pelt, his face visible through carefully cut eye holes. The mural sequence continued for 12 panels total, ending with the priest, now depicted as a complete Were-Jaguar hybrid, consuming a human heart while standing in a pool of what pigment analysis confirmed was cinnabar mixed with human blood. At his feet lay small bones arranged to spell out glyphs that modern Olmec linguistic experts tentatively translated as, "I have tasted night. I walk as death walks. The children open the door." If this story is giving you chills, hit that like button. We're only halfway through uncovering what happened at Venta, and the evidence gets even more disturbing. Share this with someone who loves dark historical mysteries. Have you ever wondered what makes humans capable of such acts in the name of religion? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's discover what happens when archaeologists finally connected all these incidents into one terrifying picture. July 1970. The joint Smithsonian-ENA expedition had one goal: definitively map the underground architecture of Venta using new ground-penetrating radar technology. Team leader Dr. Rebecca Gonzalez expected to find the standard layout of ceremonial centers, offering caches, elite burials, storage chambers. What the radar revealed instead made her request military presence before proceeding. The scans showed an extensive network of chambers beneath Complex A, the main pyramid. Not random caves or natural formations, but deliberately constructed rooms connected by passages, extending 40 meters below ground level. The largest chamber measured 12 by 15 meters, roughly the size of a modern classroom, and the radar detected significant mass inside. Lots of mass. Excavation began on August 3, 1970. The entrance tunnel, when cleared, showed tool marks consistent with obsidian blades, thousands of scraping cuts that would have taken months of labor. The tunnel descended at a precise 15-degree angle, designed to drain water but allow human passage. After 30 meters, it opened into the first chamber. Dr. Gonzalez's initial site report, marked Sensitive Restricted Circulation, describes what they found. Chamber 1 contains approximately 200 juvenile skeletal remains, ages 4-12 years, arranged in concentric circles around a central altar. The altar itself is carved with Were-Jaguar iconography and shows residual organic staining consistent with blood. Most significantly, Sev. NT% of the skeletal remains show evidence of jaguar trauma, bite marks, claw punctures, crushing wounds consistent with large felid attacks. But these marks are precise, ritualized, not random predation. The second chamber contained the answer to a question no one wanted to ask. 8 adult male skeletons, significantly taller and more robust than typical Olmec remains, lay on stone benches arranged around the room's perimeter. Each skeleton wore a ceremonial jade mask carved to represent a jaguar face, and each skeleton had undergone extensive ante-mortem body modification that went far beyond the typical cranial shaping or dental filing documented in other Olmec sites. The priests and forensic analysis confirmed these were elite males based on bone chemistry and stress markers, had systematically altered their own bodies. Their teeth had been filed to sharp points and inlaid with jade to create fang-like canines. Their finger bones showed evidence of repeated breaking and resetting, artificially lengthening and curving them into claw-like configurations. Most disturbing, their skull modifications weren't the gentle shaping practiced on infants but aggressive, adult trepanation at multiple sites, creating permanent cranial deformations that would have caused chronic pain and neurological damage. Dr. Gonzalez's team brought in Dr. Howard Stein, a neurologist from Johns Hopkins, to examine the skull modifications. His analysis, published in 1973 in the Journal of Archaeological Science, proposed a chilling hypothesis. The trepanation points correspond to areas of the brain associated with inhibition, social bonding, and fear response. While I cannot definitively state intention without written records, The placement suggests these individuals were attempting to modify behavior and perception. In modern terms, they were performing crude lobotomies on themselves, possibly seeking to remove psychological barriers to committing acts that would normally be impossible for socialized humans. The third chamber was the priest's workshop. Stone tables held jade cutting tools, obsidian blades in various sizes, and bone needles still threaded with dried sinew. Clay vessels contained residues of hallucinogenic compounds, psilocybin mushrooms, morning glory seeds, and an unidentified plant alkaloid that produced symptoms similar to modern dissociative anesthetics. But it was the pelts that provided the most damning evidence. 43 complete jaguar pelts, professionally tanned and tailored, hung on wooden racks. Beneath them, folded with identical care, lay 37 human skin garments, sized for children. The preservation was extraordinary. The dry, sealed chamber had created conditions similar to Egyptian tombs. Forensic analysis by Dr. Patricia Chen at the University of Arizona confirmed the garments were human skin, tanned using the same method as the jaguar pelts, and showing cut patterns that indicated they were removed from living victims based on stress markers in the dermal tissue. Dr. Chen's report included a detail that made international headlines when it was leaked in 1974. The human skin garments show evidence of repeated use, wear patterns, repairs with sinew stitching, and layered staining consistent with ceremonial application of cinnabar paint. These were not one-time ritual objects but regularly utilized garments in an ongoing practice. Estimation based on wear analysis suggests each garment was used in 15 separate ceremonies before replacement. The implications regarding the total number of victims required to maintain this practice are staggering. The fourth and final chamber provided context that transformed the discovery from horror to tragedy. Carved into every wall were dated glyphs, the Olmec long-count calendar system that allowed precise chronological recording. Dr. Michael Coe, the preeminent Olmec calendar specialist, translated the inscriptions and reconstructed a timeline spanning 127 Ye. The transformation cult began approximately 925 BC with a single priest-king named in glyphs as He Who Stalks. The inscriptions described his vision quest in which the Were-Jaguar Lord appeared and taught him the true transformation, not symbolic adoption of jaguar attributes, but literal metamorphosis requiring the innocent door, child sacrifice, and the wearing of flesh. For 13 decades, successive generations of priests conducted the rituals, believing they were achieving actual transformation, that they were becoming supernatural beings with enhanced senses, strength, and spiritual power. The inscriptions grew increasingly grandiose, describing nighttime hunts, supernatural visions, and communication with underworld deities. The final inscription, dated to approximately 798 BC, read, "We have become the night. 50 hunters walk in jaguar skin. The children sleep inside our flesh. We are no longer men." Shortly after that final inscription, Venta was abandoned. No gradual decline, no evidence of conquest or environmental disaster. The population simply left, dispersing into the surrounding regions, carrying stories that would echo through Mesoamerican mythology for the next 3,000 years. Warnings about priests who became monsters, about the Were-Jaguar cult that devoured its own children. The 1970 Venta discovery created immediate controversy that extended far beyond archaeology. The Mexican government, protective of its cultural heritage and concerned about damage to its international reputation, initially classified the findings and restricted access to the site. This was, after all, the era when Mexico was building its modern identity partly on romantic interpretations of pre-Columbian civilizations. Evidence of systematic child torture and ritual serial killing didn't fit the narrative. Dr. Rebecca Gonzalez fought the classification order. In a series of increasingly heated exchanges with INA administrators, preserved in her personal papers now housed at Stanford University, she argued, "We cannot sanitize ancient horror simply because it challenged ulation." Newspaper sensationalism followed. "Ancient werewolf cult discovered," blared the headline in the National Enquirer. More seriously, indigenous rights groups protested what they called the deliberate demonization of native peoples and demanded all remains be returned for traditional burial. The controversy forced a reckoning within archaeology itself. How do we present evidence of atrocity committed by ancient peoples without falling into racist tropes or colonial justifications? How do we honor victims while respecting descendant communities who may view these events differently? The Venta case became a touchstone for these debates, referenced in ethics guidelines developed throughout the 1980s. Dr. Gonzalez, who had fought to reveal the truth, found herself attacked from multiple directions. Conservatives who saw her as anti-Christian for humanizing pre-Columbian peoples, progressives who saw her as perpetuating harmful stereotypes, and Mexican officials who viewed her as an ungrateful foreign researcher causing diplomatic problems. She left field archaeology in 1978 and spent her remaining career teaching undergraduate courses at a small liberal arts college in Vermont. But the scientific investigation continued, albeit quietly. Dr. Patricia Chen's skin analysis techniques, developed specifically for the Venta garments, became foundational for forensic pathology. The methodology she pioneered for determining ante-mortem versus post-mortem skin removal now appears in FBI training manuals. Horror from 3,000 years ago advanced our ability to solve modern crimes. Similarly, the neurological theories proposed by Dr. Howard Stein launched an entire subfield studying trauma-induced personality changes in ritualized contexts. His 1976 book, The Neurology of Religious Violence, used Venta as a case study in how humans can systematically override natural behavioral inhibitions through combined physical and psychological manipulation. The book influenced everything from cult deprogramming techniques to military PTSD treatment protocols. The legal implications resonated in unexpected ways. In 1979, the American Indian Religious Freedom Act was being debated in Congress. Venta became a case study in the limitations of religious freedom. Opponents of the act pointed to Were-Jaguar priests as evidence that not all religious practices deserve protection. Supporters argued that highlighting ancient atrocities was deliberately inflammatory and designed to undermine indigenous sovereignty. The act eventually passed, but included language about practices that caused serious harm, partially inspired by the Venta debate. International archaeological policy changed directly because of the Venta controversy. UNESCO guidelines adopted in 1980 included specific protocols for handling evidence of ancient atrocities. Sites must be fully documented before reburial. Descendant communities must be consulted, but cannot unilaterally block scientific study. Victims of ancient crimes must be recognized in permanent memorial forms. And finding evidence of systematic violence triggers mandatory reporting to international databases, tracking patterns of historical trauma. The priests themselves, the modified skeletons from Chamber 2, became subjects of ongoing study despite the reburial order. Before the remains were returned to Mexican custody, researchers created detailed CT scans, dental molds, and bone density profiles. These data points continue generating research papers. A 2003 study using modern neurological imaging techniques on the scan data confirmed Dr. Stein's original hypothesis. The trepanation patterns would have severely impaired emotional regulation and fear response, while potentially enhancing dissociative states. But perhaps the most significant aftermath was what happened to the modern Zoque people, who claimed descent from the Olmec. For decades they'd been treated as living relics, their contempora. Rye struggles ignored while archaeologists romanticized their ancestors. The Venta revelations forced a more honest conversation. Yes, the ancient Olmec built impressive monuments and made sophisticated art. They were also capable of monstrous cruelty, just like every other human civilization throughout history. Zoque activists used this opening to challenge both romanticization and demonization. Our ancestors were complete human beings, wrote Juan Morales in a 1982 essay for Mexico City's Proceso magazine. They created beauty and committed atrocities. They loved their children and sacrificed their children. This contradiction is human, not indigenous. Stop treating us as either noble savages or bloodthirsty monsters. We are people with a complex history, just like everyone else. The site itself remained closed to the public until 2005, when the Mexican government finally opened Venta Archaeological Park with full disclosure about what was found there. The visitor center includes a memorial wall listing the names of all researchers who fought to reveal the truth, including Dr. Howard Chen, who was posthumously pardoned and had his academic credentials restored in 1998. The wall also includes a space for Los Niños Desconocidos, the unknown children, with 287 candles representing the estimated total number of victims based on the excavated remains and the timeline carved in Chamber 4. The Venta discovery forced uncomfortable questions that echo far beyond ancient Mesoamerica. How do ordinary humans convince themselves that torturing children is not just acceptable but holy? What social and psychological mechanisms allow ritualized atrocity to continue for over a century? The Were-Jaguar cult offers a case study in the architecture of systemic abuse disguised as religious practice. First, establish absolute authority. The Venta priesthood controlled food distribution, astronomical knowledge, and access to trade goods. They were economically and spiritually indispensable. Second, create ideological separation between perpetrators and victims. The children weren't being murdered, they were being transformed into sacred doorways. They should be honored to serve the divine purpose. Third, incremental escalation. The inscriptions show the rituals grew more extreme over time, each generation pushing boundaries the previous generation had established. This pattern repeats throughout history. The Catholic Church's abuse scandals, revealed in the early 2000s, followed identical architecture, institutional authority, theological justification, incremental normalization of abuse. The Jonestown Massacre in 1978 demonstrated how quickly, just 9 years, a community could progress from mainstream religious practice to mass murder-suicide when led by someone claiming divine transformation. Heaven's Gate, the Order of the Solar Temple, the Movement for the Restoration of the Ten Commandments, all featured leaders claiming supernatural transformation, and all ended in mass death. Dr. Philip Zimbardo, the Stanford prison experiment psychologist, studied the Venta case in his 2007 book, The Lucifer Effect. He argued that the Were-Jaguar priests underwent the same psychological transformation he'd observed in his prison guards, assigned a powerful role, given ideological permission, and isolated from normalizing social feedback. Ordinary humans rapidly adopt behaviors they would have found unthinkable weeks earlier. The neurological modifications the priests performed on themselves add another layer. Modern research into violent extremist groups shows patterns of ritualized self-harm, scarification, sleep deprivation, physical ordeals that literally alter brain chemistry and pain tolerance. The Venta priests were performing crude versions of these modifications, possibly stumbling onto methods that genuinely changed their subjective experience and reinforced their belief in transformation. But here's the darkest implication. It may have worked, in a sense. Not literal shape-shifting, obviously, but psychological transformation into something functionally inhuman. The combination of hallucinogens, self-inflicted brain damage, ritualized violence, and group reinforcement could have created genuine altered consciousness states, where the priests perceived themselves as were-jaguars. Their victims' terror would have felt like natural prey response. The kill itself would have triggered neurological reward pathways, creating addiction to the ritual. We see this pattern in modern serial killers who develop elaborate fantasy systems that justify their crimes. The Were-Jaguar cult was a serial killer mythology scaled to institutional practice, protected by religious authority and sustained across generations. The archaeological community continues debating whether Venta represents an extreme outlier or reveals something more common about ancient religious practice. Similar patterns emerge from other cultures. The Carthaginian child sacrifices to Baal, the ritual torture practices of certain Mississippian cultures, the systematic human sacrifice that characterized Aztec religion. Are these aberrations or variations on a fundamental human capacity for ritualized violence? Dr. Lawrence Keeley's 1996 book, War Before Civilization, used Venta as evidence that pre-state societies could be extraordinarily violent, challenging the noble savage narrative. His critics argued he was cherry-picking extreme examples to justify a cynical view of human nature. The debate continues. What's undeniable is Venta's influence on how we understand religious violence. When ISIS videos showed beheadings performed in ritualized fashion, with perpetrators clearly believing they were serving divine purpose, scholars immediately drew parallels to the Were-Jaguar cult. The psychological mechanisms were identical: absolute ideological certainty, dehumanization of victims, group reinforcement, and the intoxicating experience of absolute power over life and death. The Venta case also transformed how museums present difficult history. The challenging histories movement in modern museology, directly presenting evidence of atrocity rather than sanitizing it, gained momentum from the Venta controversy. When the National Museum of the American Indian opened in Washington, D.C. in 2004, it included exhibits on violence within indigenous societies, a decision that would have been unthinkable before Venta forced the conversation. Perhaps most significantly, Venta demolished the false binary between civilized and savage societies. The Olmec had sophisticated engineering, complex astronomical knowledge, and continental trade networks. They were also capable of systematic child torture. Advanced civilization and moral horror coexist easily. The 20th century taught us this through the Holocaust. Industrialized nations with deep philosophical traditions can commit mechanized genocide. Venta taught us the pattern extends far beyond Europe, far beyond modernity. It's a human problem, not a cultural one. The children whose bones lay in those chambers represent countless other children throughout history who became victims of adult delusion disguised as divine purpose. They remind us that every religious tradition, every ideology, every system of thought carries the potential for this corruption. The Were-Jaguar priests convinced themselves they were becoming gods. They were becoming monsters. But they were human monsters, and that's precisely what makes Venta so disturbing. We want ancient horror to feel distant, alien, impossible in our modern context. Venta denies us that comfort. The priests were smart, organized, culturally sophisticated people who believed absolutely in their divine mission. They're not alien. They're a warning. What do you think drove the Were-Jaguar priests to such systematic atrocity? Was it genuine delusion, gradual moral corruption, or something dark? The simple human capacity for cruelty when given absolute power and ideological permission. Leave your theories in the comments below. This story is a reminder that every civilization, ancient or modern, contains the seeds of horror. The question isn't whether we're capable of this. History proves we are. The question is what safeguards we build, what questions we dare to ask, what truths we're willing to face about human nature. If this deep dive into archaeological horror affected you, subscribe to Fear Sermon for more lost chapters of human history, the ones we'd rather forget but must remember. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when we uncover the next dark truth hiding beneath the earth. Share this video with someone who appreciates the importance of confronting historical horror honestly. And tell us in the comments, what other ancient mysteries should we investigate next? The children of Venta can't speak for themselves anymore, but their bones tell a story that echoes across 3,000 years. A story about what happens when faith becomes fanaticism, when priests become predators, and when entire societies look away from evil dressed in sacred robes. See you in the next video. Until then, remember, the most terrifying monsters in history have always been human.